Hey guys. My podcast co host is newly single, so we've been talking a lot on the show about what the best male dating strategies are. And as usual, you guys have heard me say this before, I suggested that he start a Match.com account. So a few days ago, I made a dummy account and poked around to see what the pool of ladies in Bozeman is like, which is a conservative city. And I will tell you this, it is the most depressing pool of women that I have ever seen, outside of Seattle, of course. I checked some other conservative cities and was seeing much of the same. Granted, unmarriageable women, single moms, fat chicks, they're going to be attracted to online dating services because they can hide their flaws, at least initially. Lying about your life and appearance is a big problem in online dating sites, but I still maintain that it's one of the better ways to meet quality women. I've read that up to a third of new marriages begin online. After college, it's difficult to meet people, so outside of work, bars, the gym, there really aren't many options but online dating. So there are a lot of marriage oriented, solid women on there, even if they're few and far between, and it does require a lot of work. I met my fiance this way, and I know at least 5 other married couples that met from Match. If there's any interest from men or women about how to do this, the best way to highlight your attributes and market yourself while still being authentic, how to approach members of the opposite sex on Match, etc., let me know in the comment section and I will make a video about it. Anyway, because I live in Seattle and am surrounded by feminists that are definitely going to die alone, I thought that perhaps my perception of Western women was a bit skewed and began to think maybe I believe that this is worse than it actually is, and maybe I'm too hard on women because I'm just projecting my own self-loathing. But this Match.com experiment gave me some visual evidence that this is, in fact, a real epidemic. My criteria was age 18 to 30, no overweight women, no smokers, and no one with children. This led to a grand total of about 12 matches, only 4 of which weren't grotesquely ugly. There were a few hundred matches within that age range, but the vast majority were either very overweight, covered in tattoos, or were single moms, which all should be non-starters for any self-respecting man. Even if you don't have a lot of money or much to offer right now, the only way that you will ensure that you will never improve your prospects is by attaching yourself to a woman that is a liability in one way or another. It is going to be much, much more difficult to improve financial prospects in particular if you're saddled raising someone else's kid. Of the 4 chicks on Match that appeared somewhat appropriate, I found one on Instagram and she had pages of Planned Parenthood activism, quotes about loving herself, a million cleavage-bearing mirror selfies. The others also proved undateable for one reason or another. Most notably, and this is true even of the unattractive women that I saw, they had a strict list of demands. I actually saw a profile of a 30-year-old morbidly obese single mom with tattoos that said something along the lines of no bigots, no Trump supporters, blah, blah, blah. This really brought it home for me. Western women have been told their whole lives that they are so great, that they don't need to change nothing for no man, and if that man doesn't like you for the useless fatty that you are, well, kick him to the curb. He was a misogynist anyway. Even a few decades ago, mothers were most interested in making their daughters marriageable. My mom sent me to etiquette school, and most of my girlfriends were sent as well. If I gained a few pounds, she would be like, listen, you're getting fat. This is what mothers should be doing, not worshiping their girls simply for being born female. They need to be honest with their daughters about how very important their looks and demeanor are. They aren't everything, but they're important. And they should also be teaching them that a career is secondary to finding a husband, unless they exhibit an extraordinary talent. I spent the first half of this bitching, and I like to post solutions on my channel every once in a while. So all of this made me think, what can Western women do to start providing value to men again? Even though it is really easy to rail on these chicks, and I do it all the time, I also should point out that this is a generation of women that was raised by feminist mothers and broken beta male fathers, or in divorced households, 70% of which were initiated by women. I'm not trying to take the blame off of my generation of women, but imposing solutions, it does help to understand the source of certain threads of indoctrination. Their mothers never taught them what qualities were important to get and keep a man, and worse, they were told that all men are rapists in training and that they don't deserve basic respect. A woman that's been taught that from childhood is going to be so maladjusted that it isn't likely that she's going to be able to turn it around. When I look at women today, fat, defiant, can't cook, won't clean, they're in huge amounts of debt, they have an inflated sense of self-worth, I look at them and think, why would any man ever show you basic respect that you are clearly incapable of reciprocating, or embark on a relationship of any kind with you, let alone a marriage? And I'm not coming from a place of knowing it all. I had so much to learn. This was a huge uphill battle for me, and going to Mizzou nearly turned me into an unmarriageable feminist like it did to some of my friends. You should see the white, man-hating, long armpit hair Facebook posts they put up. And they're in their late 20s and early 30s now. They aren't 18 or 19, where a guy might be like, okay, I can try to date this chick and maybe turn this disaster around. It's too late for them. But I realized I was being indoctrinated, that I wanted to have a family, and that it was my responsibility to learn how to be a good woman before it was too late. So I worked really hard. I learned how to cook and keep a house, and I became very financially responsible, started to build wealth, and have finally paid off every dollar of debt that I have just before my wedding this summer. I suppose that if they don't care, it may not even matter, but it seems that the journey for self-improvement in Western women has to start with the simple questions: what do men want and what do they need? Of course, men want a mate that is thin, attractive, fertile. I can't even believe I have to say this, but here we are. Women think that men have ridiculous standards for beauty, but when I've seen friends and family choose their wives, not a one of them was worried about her being a perfect 10. What they wanted across the board was a hot enough woman who had all of the other more intangible characteristics that they want. If fat single moms in America can make all of these demands and have a totally inflated sense of self-worth, imagine how much worse and how much more entitled a stunning Western woman is. She is likely not going to accept anything less than a 7-figure salary and washboard abs, or she'll feel like she's been gypped. So women need to realize that men aren't generally holding unrealistic expectations. They're not really deciding if you're in the top 1% of all women. It's more like a baseline level of minimum attractiveness that has to be achieved. This is great news for a sweet, above average looking, wholesome girl. That's the marriage zone. Just have a healthy lifestyle and work out. You don't need to go crazy. As far as other things that men want, I used to think that they were so complicated, but really, I think that all they want is for their basic needs to be met, for you to support them and in whatever way you can to make their lives easier. This sounds like a small thing, right? But this is not natural for Western women. Playing a supportive role is something we're taught from birth enslaves us. And I discussed this a bit in a video about the myth of egalitarianism, which I've linked below. We're taught to outright reject the concept of submission, and in turn, it has created 2 generations of women that are defiant, resent their husbands, and demand egalitarianism, despite it being the very thing that kills their sexual attraction to their partner. Men need support, emotional and logistical. They need sex, they need food, and they need to work. Of course, that isn't all they need, but it's a pretty good start. The job of a good woman, and she knows this, is to do whatever she can to provide the necessities, to minimize the burden of cooking and housework, and to help create a stable home life so that the man can be really well rested and mentally prepared to work as hard as he can. Now the million-dollar question. What can Western women do to begin providing value to men again so that we can repair gender relations and start to build a more functional society? I believe that the most important thing a woman can do to avoid indoctrination and a drunken hookup culture, to have time to have a bunch of kids, and to prevent dropping a debt bomb on her future husband is to avoid going to college. Like I mentioned earlier, when I check out some old female acquaintances from college on Facebook, I routinely see things like "fuck all white cis-het men." One chick is even Antifa now. And some of these girls were nice, pretty Christian girls from big, wonderful families. Then they turned their carefully handled daughters over to Mizzou, like so many parents in Missouri do, and she comes back a rabid, man-hating, racist feminist, then carries that through at least the next decade. It must be a nightmare for these parents. I did not need to go to Mizzou. It just put me 30 grand in debt, gave me a quasi-worthless degree that chained me to corporate desks, and very nearly indoctrinated me for life with feminist nonsense. I also didn't need to have any number of jobs in finance that I've had. Largely, I was a wage slave that lazily did menial work for an already super wealthy group or individual. There really is no pride in that kind of work, even though people were telling me the whole time that this is what I needed to do to provide value to society. I was bitterly depressed, had no idea why, because I thought I was fulfilling my greatest destiny, and no one was telling me, look, this is a waste of your life. Find a good man, settle down. There's no happiness for women in corporate life. What we need to be telling women is, the company you're working for doesn't give a shit about you. And more importantly, your career almost certainly doesn't matter. And if you're successful, which will require you to sacrifice much of your femininity, well, at the end of that is an 80-hour work week and a Jamaican nanny raising your babies. And that's if you're lucky enough to meet some effeminate man that's still lost in the myth of egalitarianism to impregnate you at age 40. I know so few women with remarkable intellectual abilities that translate to a specific and meaningful career, at least meaningful enough that it offsets having kids. If you're like Ann Coulter, you very well may be the kind of person that can contribute more to the world through their work than through having children. But much, much fewer women are actually of this intellectual caliber and skill set than is generally believed by women. Almost all women would be happier being mothers and will feel confined and beaten down by their careers. And God help them when they realize that they will never be mothers. So if chicks are going to stop going to college, it isn't going to help them unless they use this time wisely. 40 years ago or so looked really different than 18 today. Our generation specifically has horrible arrested development, both genders, and if women want to improve their value, they have to start demonstrating value at a younger age. So if you're a teenage girl, don't adopt this attitude that you have all the time in the world. You really don't. Start learning how to be an excellent cook, how to control emotional outbursts, how to really listen to somebody. Start educating yourself on political matters. Read for pleasure. Just make yourself better, genuinely a better, more useful, more learned person. You can learn anything on YouTube, recipes, another language, knitting, music, any subject matter you desire. Just because I don't want you to go to college, it does not mean that I want you to be uneducated. I want every woman to be like Elizabeth Bennet, and she was not this meek, stupid wallflower. She was dignified, self-possessed, articulate, educated, yet still feminine. I just want you to take your education into your own capable hands. Allowing a bunch of Marxists to shape the way young women think in their most formative years seems criminal to me, and I would sleep much better knowing that these young ladies had taken it upon themselves to decide what they will and will not learn. If you do this for 5 years after you get out of high school, you'll be ready to be a good wife and mom by the age of 23. And unlike your idiot peers, which you will feel worlds above in terms of maturity, you will develop an appreciation of the myriad accomplishments of the men that made your easy existence possible. They're not your enemy, and learning to respect men is going to be central to any relationship you have going forward. But again, I don't want to act like I have all of the answers here. My channel is for conveying things that I've learned and how I've bettered myself, luckily in time to have a family. And I still fight some negative tendencies daily, which is why adopting this early is really key for young women. I've heard this complaint from many men, and I'm so guilty of this myself. So it's a behavior I really actively try to combat, and that's nagging and, to a lesser degree, sharing unnecessary information with your man. I don't know why we do this, but when my fiance asks me about my day, I can just feel the inane chatter pouring out of my mouth. It's practically involuntary. Nagging is the same kind of thing, the incessant chatter. So what I try to do now to control this, before I say something to him, I try to think, does this convey any necessary information? This has actually worked, and we typically don't get to the point where he has to tune me out. I really try. Along the same lines, ask about his life, his feelings, how he is doing. Everyone likes to talk about themselves, but it shows your man that you support him and that you care about his sacrifices and his work, and really try to listen. I know this is hard for your self-important extroverts like me, but try to develop this skill set if it doesn't come naturally to you. He will really appreciate this and feel loved. I asked my fiance for input on this script, what he thinks is the most important thing for women to do or to avoid doing in a relationship. He said that the worst thing a woman can do is insult or emasculate a man in front of his friends. I'm sure we've all seen this a few times. A couple we know gets into a tiff in front of us, and the man stands silently looking at his feet or something while the woman berates him in front of everyone. I can only imagine a few more emasculating scenarios than this. So what I'll say on this one is try to be acutely aware of how you treat your significant other in front of his company. Even if you're really pissed, even rightfully pissed, be as cordial as you can and do not air your grievances until you're in the privacy of your own home. If you unload on him in front of his friends, it is going to end up being more damaging to your relationship than you possibly can imagine. My remaining recommendations for women are fairly obvious. Stay as thin as you can. If you gain 50 pounds because you're lazy, that's grounds for divorce. Do not think that because you snagged a man that you no longer have to compete with other women. But that goes for men and women. You always have to be aware that if you're with a person of high quality, they will have other options. You don't want to reduce their quality to control their options. That's sociopathic. I've seen and heard about this before. Men keeping their wives fat and vice versa, that kind of thing. Instead, why wouldn't you want to keep your own value high to compete? And finally, just don't be a liability. Don't be a financial liability by bringing in a bunch of debt, student loans or otherwise. Don't be an emotional liability by being unpredictable. Always think, what value am I providing this person? What reason am I giving them to stay with me? If the reason is obligation, that isn't going to be a strong enough incentive, and things will probably fall apart. Men care about getting their basic needs met, and women mostly care about security, emotional and financial. All we really need to do to start mending relations between the genders is to understand these basic things about one another and to start approaching relationships not from a defensive position, but from one of respect and compassion. And most importantly, with the understanding that we must provide real, tangible benefits to one another. As I mentioned at the top, I am on a matchmaking mission. So if you are around 25 or under, you don't smoke, no kids, not fat, or you know someone in Bozeman, please shoot me an email with a picture and I will send it over to Matt Christensen. Thanks, folks, and I'll see you soon. Bye.